Li Jun felt the cold metal of the chains around his wrists as the alien guards pushed him down the narrow corridor of the prison ship. The walls were made of some kind of blue metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Everything smelled like chemicals and something that reminded him of burnt plastic. Behind him, he could hear Park Hana's footsteps as she walked in her own chains. She had not said a word since they left the holding cells 3 hours ago. The guards were tall creatures, with scaly green skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were yellow and looked like a snake's eyes. They wore black uniforms that covered most of their bodies, but June could see their clawed hands holding energy weapons. These were Sectar, one of the main species in the Galactic Council. They had been the ones to arrest June and Hana on the space station where they worked. "Move faster, human," one of the guards said in a voice that sounded like gravel falling down a metal tube. "The ambassador is waiting." June wanted to say something back, but he knew it would not help. He had already tried to explain that they had done nothing wrong. The aliens did not care. Being human was crime enough for them. They walked past more guards and other prisoners. Most of the other prisoners were aliens, too. But they looked at the humans with something like pity in their strange eyes. The corridor opened into a large room with windows that showed the black of space. Stars moved slowly past the windows as the ship traveled. In the center of the room stood a creature that was even taller than the guards. This one had purple skin and wore long robes that seemed to float around its body. Its head was shaped like a triangle, and it had 3 eyes arranged in a line down the center of its face. This was Ambassador Velthak, the one who would decide their fate. "Humans." Li Jun and Park Hana, the ambassador said in a voice that was somehow both loud and quiet at the same time. "You stand before the judgment of the Galactic Council." June looked around the room. There were other aliens here, too. Some looked like giant insects with too many legs. Others were covered in what looked like gray fur and had faces that were almost like cats but wrong in ways that made June's skin crawl. All of them stared at the 2 humans like they were looking at dangerous animals. "We haven't done anything wrong," Hana said suddenly. Her voice was steady, but June could hear the anger underneath. "We were just doing our jobs on the station." "Your crime is not what you have done," the ambassador replied. "Your crime is what you are." One of the insect creatures made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "Humans," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "The most violent species to ever reach the stars, the most dangerous beings in the galaxy." June almost laughed. He thought about his job on the space station, fixing air recycling systems and making sure the water flowed properly. He thought about Hana's work in the biology labs, studying plants to make better food for everyone. Dangerous? They spent their days making sure other people stayed alive and healthy. "The Council has decided to show mercy," Ambassador Velthak continued. "Instead of execution, you will be exiled." A large screen appeared in the air above them. It showed a planet that looked angry. The surface was covered in storms that swirled like hurricanes. Lightning flashed constantly between massive clouds. Even from space, the planet looked like it wanted to kill anything that came near it. "This is Kethmora," the ambassador said, "a world that we have classified as extinction class. No species has ever survived there for more than a few hours. The gravity is nearly twice what you are used to. The air is poison. The storms can destroy mountains. The creatures that live there are the size of your vehicles, and they are always hungry." The screen changed to show images of the surface. June saw creatures that looked like they were made of teeth and claws. He saw trees that seemed to move on their own. He saw rain that ate holes in rocks as it fell. It looked like the kind of place that would kill you just for looking at it wrong. The average life expectancy on Kethmora for any known species is 4.7 hours, another alien said. This one looked like it was made of living rock. "The longest any creature has survived there was 11 hours and 32 minutes. "You will be given basic survival equipment," Ambassador Velthak said. "Food for 7 days, water for 3 days, shelter materials that should last at least 24 hours, and a distress beacon that you may activate when you are ready to accept death with dignity." June looked at the images of the planet again. The storms did look pretty bad. The gravity would definitely be a problem. And those creatures did look hungry. But he had grown up in the slums of Seoul, where the air was poison and the rain was Acid and the gangs were always hunting. He had worked on asteroid mining ships where one small mistake meant everyone died in the vacuum. He had lived through 3 reactor failures and a plague that killed half the people on his home station. Honestly, June said, looking directly at the ambassador, I've had worse Tuesdays. The aliens looked at each other with confusion. Some of them made sounds that might have been their version of nervous laughter. The ambassador's 3 eyes blinked one after another. You do not understand, the rock creature said. This world will kill you. Nothing survives on Kethemora. Nothing? Hana asked. She had been quiet during most of the speech, but now she sounded interested instead of angry. But something must live there if there are creatures hunting. What? Do they eat? How do they reproduce? What's the primary energy source for the ecosystem? The aliens looked even more confused. These questions are not important, the ambassador said. You will not live long enough for the answers to matter. We'll see about that, June said. The guards led them to another room where their survival equipment waited. It looked like camping gear that had been designed by someone who had never actually been camping. The shelter was made of material so thin that June could almost see through it. The food was in packages that said they were suitable for most known species, which probably meant they would taste like cardboard. The water containers were small and made of metal that felt cheap. This equipment is rated for survival on Class 7 hostile worlds, one of the guards said. It should provide adequate protection for the brief time you have remaining. June picked up one of the food packages and read the label. It was written in several alien languages, but there was a small section in human English at the bottom. The ingredients list made it sound like they were going to be eating processed plastic with vitamin supplements. How thoughtful, Hana said, looking at the medical kit. It contained bandages and some kind of alien medicine that probably wouldn't work on human biology. They're really going all out to make sure we're comfortable before we die. The ship shook slightly as it began to enter the atmosphere of Kethemora. Through the small window in their equipment room, June could see the storm clouds getting closer. Lightning flashed so brightly that it hurt to look at. The ship shook harder as it pushed through the winds. Preparing for surface deployment, an alien voice announced over the ship's communication system. All personnel should remain secured. Surface winds are currently at Category 9 intensity. What's Category 9? June asked one of the guards. Winds strong enough to lift a building, the guard replied. Your species would call them impossible to survive. Sounds fun, June said. The ship landed with a crash that threw everyone against the walls. Emergency lights flashed red and alien. Voices shouted commands in languages that June didn't understand. The guards looked nervous as they prepared to open the exit door. Last chance to request immediate execution, Ambassador Velthok said as he entered the room. It would be more merciful than what this world will do to you. June looked at Hana. She looked back at him. They had worked together for 3 years. They had survived disasters that would have killed most people. They had fixed problems that alien engineers said were impossible to fix. They had kept entire space stations running when everyone said it couldn't be done. Thanks for the offer, Hana said. But we'll take our chances with Tuesday. The door opened, and the wind hit them like a physical blow. Rain that smelled like acid began to fall immediately. In the distance, something that sounded like a cross between a lion and a freight train roared loud enough to be heard over the storm. The aliens quickly pushed the survival equipment out of the ship and then slammed the door shut. June and Hana stood alone on the surface of the deadliest world in the galaxy. The ship lifted off immediately, disappearing into the storm clouds above them. They were alone with nothing but inadequate supplies and a planet that wanted them dead. June looked around at the hostile landscape, then looked at Hana. Well, he said, raising his voice to be heard over the wind. At least it's not raining fire. As if the universe was listening, something exploded in the distance and burning debris began to fall from the sky. You had to say it, Hana shouted. Back, but she was smiling. They picked up their equipment and began walking toward what looked like it might be shelter. Behind them, the storm grew stronger and something large and hungry began to follow their scent. 3 months later, Lee Jun stood on top of what used to be a hill and was now the foundation for his house. He was watching the morning acid rain collect in the channels he had carved into the rock. The rain ran down into his collection tanks. where it would be filtered and neutralized before being used to power the generator he had built from salvaged alien equipment and local materials. The view from his house was actually quite nice once you got used to it. The storm clouds moved in patterns that were almost like art. The lightning came in colors he had never seen on Earth, mostly purple and green with occasional flashes of gold. The trees, which the aliens had warned were carnivorous and aggressive, turned out to be more like very large flowers that happened to eat insects. The insects were the size of small dogs, but they were also quite tasty when cooked properly. "June, breakfast is ready," Park Hana called from inside their shelter. He climbed down from his observation post and walked through the door they had, built from the bones of what the aliens called a destroyer beast. The destroyer beast had been the first large predator to find them after they landed. It was about the size of a city bus, covered in armor plating, and had teeth like sword blades. It had also been surprisingly slow and not very smart. After it charged them, June had simply stepped aside and let it run into a rock wall. The impact had knocked it unconscious, and Hana had finished it off with a large stone. The meat from the destroyer beast had fed them for 2 weeks. The armor plating made excellent building materials. The bones were strong enough to use as structural supports. Even the teeth made good tools once they were properly sharpened. Nothing on this planet went to waste in their new home. "Smells good," June said as he entered their main living area. Hana had become quite skilled at cooking the local wildlife. This morning, she was preparing what looked like eggs from some kind of bird creature, along with vegetables that she had grown in their garden. The garden was probably June's favorite part of their new home. Hana had discovered that the soil on Kethmora was incredibly rich, probably because of all the decomposing predators that died in the constant fighting for territory. Add some compost made from their own food scraps and the remains of creatures they had hunted, and almost anything would grow here. The vegetables grew larger and faster than anything they had seen on Earth or the space stations. "The storm warning system picked up another big one coming in from the east," Hana said as she served the food. "Should hit us around noon." June nodded and checked the displays that he had built into the wall. The storm detection system was made from salvaged parts of their original survival equipment, combined with some interesting crystal formations he had found in the caves nearby. The crystals seemed to react to changes in air pressure and electromagnetic fields, making them perfect for predicting the massive storms that swept across the planet every few days. "Category 7 this time," he said, reading the data. "We'll want to secure the workshop before it hits." The workshop was built into a cave system that June had expanded and reinforced. This was where he built and repaired their equipment, where Hana conducted her research, and where they stored their food supplies. The caves provided natural protection from the storms, and the temperature was stable year-round. After breakfast, they walked outside to check on their other projects. The early morning was usually the calmest time on Kethmora, with only occasional lightning and winds that were merely strong instead of deadly. The gravity that was supposed to crush them had actually been helpful once they got used to it. After 3 months of living in nearly twice Earth gravity, both of them were stronger and faster than they had ever been. Their settlement, which they had started calling New Tuesday as a joke, had grown considerably since those first terrifying days. The main house was built into the hillside, providing natural protection from storms and predators. The workshop caves extended deep underground, connecting to a natural spring that provided fresh water. The garden area was enclosed by a fence made from destroyer beast bones, which kept out the smaller predators while allowing the beneficial insects to come and go. "The trap system caught 3 more runners last night," Hana said, checking the snares she had set up around the perimeter. Runners were wolf-sized predators that hunted in packs. They were fast and smart, but they were also predictable. Once you understood their hunting patterns, they were easy to catch. The meat was lean and flavorful, and their pelts made good clothing and bedding. June was checking the water filtration system when he heard a sound that didn't belong. It was a mechanical whining noise like an engine struggling against strong winds. He looked up to see something falling from the storm clouds above them. It was clearly artificial, probably a spacecraft. And it was in trouble. "Hana," he called, pointing at the sky. "We've got company." The ship was small, about the size of a shuttle, and it was spinning as it fell. Smoke or steam was trailing behind it. The pilot was either unconscious or the controls were not working, because the ship made no attempt to correct its tumbling flight. It was going to crash somewhere in the valley below their settlement. Should we help? Hana asked, even though they both already knew the answer. They grabbed their emergency kit and their weapons and began running toward the crash site. The weapons were mostly just sharp sticks and clubs made from local materials, but they were effective against the local wildlife. The emergency kit contained medical supplies that Hana had made from local plants, rope made from processed plant fibers, and tools for cutting through metal. The ship had crashed into a grove of the carnivorous trees about 2 kilometers from their settlement. Smoke was rising from the wreckage and there were scorch marks on the ground around it. The trees had already begun to close in on the crash site, attracted by the heat and the smell of potential food. "Over here," June called, pointing to what looked like an intact section of the ship. "I can hear someone moving inside." The section he indicated was part of the cockpit area. Through a cracked window, they could see movement. Someone was alive in there, but the door was jammed shut and the trees were getting closer every minute. June used a bone club to smash through the window, while Hana kept watch for predators. Inside the cockpit was a young man who looked like he was probably Korean, though it was hard to tell because he was covered in blood and his flight suit was torn. "Hey," June said, reaching through the broken window. "Can you hear me?" The pilot opened his eyes and looked at June with confusion. "You're human," he said in Korean. "How are you here? This is Kethimora." "Long story," June replied, also switching to Korean. "Right now, we need to get you out of there before those trees decide. You look tasty." The pilot's name was Kim Woo, and he had been transporting a group of alien diplomats when his ship's navigation system failed during a storm. The aliens were in the passenger section of the ship, which had been crushed during the crash. Kim Woo thought they were probably all dead. "We should check on them anyway," Hana said as they helped him out of the cockpit. "If any of them are alive, we can't just leave them here." The passenger section was badly damaged, but it was not completely destroyed. Inside, they found 3 aliens, all of them unconscious but breathing. One was a sectar like the guards who had brought June and Hana to this planet. Another was one of the insect creatures. The third was something June had never seen before, covered in what looked like gray fur and with a face that was almost like a cat, but somehow wrong. "Their environmental suits are failing," Hana observed, checking the readings on their equipment. "They can't breathe our air and their suits won't last much longer." "So we leave them," Kim Woo said. His voice was bitter. "These are the same species that exile humans to death worlds. Let them see how they like it." June looked at the dying aliens, then at Hana, then at Kim Woo. He thought about the day they had been sentenced to this planet. He remembered the fear and disgust in the aliens' eyes when they looked at humans. He remembered how they had been treated like dangerous animals. "No," he said finally. "We help them." "Are you insane?" Kim Woo asked. "They sent you here to die." "Maybe," June said, "but that doesn't mean we have to let them die." They spent the next 4 hours moving the aliens and their life support equipment to New Tuesday. It was dangerous work because the storms were getting worse and the larger predators were becoming active as the day progressed. The aliens were heavy and their equipment was fragile. Twice they had to fight off pack hunters that were attracted by the scent of blood and fear. By the time they got everyone to safety, the storm had arrived in full force. Wind that could knock down trees howled around their shelter while lightning struck the ground every few seconds. The aliens huddled, in their failing environmental suits, slowly dying from oxygen deprivation and toxic exposure. "We need to get them into a clean environment," Hana said, studying their medical readings. "Their suits won't last another hour." June looked around their shelter, thinking. The workshop caves had a small sealed chamber that he had built for working with toxic materials. It was not large enough for 3 aliens, but it might work if they modified it quickly. They spent the next 2 hours in a desperate race against time. While the storm raged outside, the alien with the cat-like face was the first to wake up properly. Its name, according to Kim Woo's translation, was High Inquisitor Mordun, and it had been one of the most vocal supporters of human exile from galactic society. Now it was lying, in a bed made from local materials, breathing filtered air in a shelter built by the very humans it had condemned to death. "This is not possible," Mordun said, looking around the sealed chamber where the 3 aliens were recovering. Our calculations showed that no species could survive on this world for more than hours. You have been here for months. Lee Jun was adjusting the air filtration system to make sure the aliens got the right mixture of gases to breathe. After a week of trial and error, he had figured out how to modify the atmospheric processors from their crashed ship to work with the natural cave ventilation system. It was not perfect, but it kept the aliens alive and reasonably comfortable. Your calculations were probably based on species that evolved on garden worlds, Hana said from where she was preparing the morning meal. Humans evolved on a death world too. We just called it Earth. The second alien, the sectar that had been part of the transport crew, made a sound like grinding metal. This one was called Captain Raxtel, and it had been responsible for maintaining the ship's security during the diplomatic mission. Earth is classified as a standard habitable world in our databases, it said. Kim Woo laughed from where he was working on repairing some of the salvaged electronics. Standard habitable? Have you ever actually looked at Earth? We have storms that can destroy entire cities. Our oceans are filled with predators that can bite through metal. Our air contains oxygen, which is one of the most corrosive gases in the universe. Our gravity is strong enough that most galactic species can't even stand up on our surface. But your species developed space travel, the third alien said. This one was called Science Director Velnath, and it belonged to a species that June had never seen before. It looked like it was made of crystalline structures that grew in organic patterns. Surely you must have achieved social harmony before, reaching the stars. Social harmony? June asked, pausing in his work. We reached space while we were still fighting wars with each other. We built our first space stations while our planet was still poisoned with industrial waste. We developed faster-than-light travel while half our population was still living in poverty. The aliens looked at each other with expressions that might have been confusion or horror. In their experience, species only achieved spaceflight after they had solved all the problems of planetary civilization. The idea of a species reaching the stars while still struggling with basic social issues was completely outside their understanding. How? Morden asked. How did your species survive long enough to develop such technology? Hana brought over a tray of food that she had prepared for the aliens. It was a mixture of local plants and synthesized nutrients that should be safe for their biology. We survived because we're adaptable, she said. When the environment tries to kill us, we learn how to make it work for us instead. As an example, she pointed to the meal she had just served. The main course was meat from a local predator that the aliens' databases classified as extremely toxic to all known life forms. Hana had discovered that the toxicity came from the creature's diet of certain local plants. By changing what the creatures ate before harvesting them, she could not only make them safe to eat, but actually improve their nutritional value. You are consuming a Class 9 hazardous organism, Science Director Velnath observed, checking its portable scanner. We're eating dinner, June corrected, and it's actually pretty good once you get the seasoning right. Over the next few days, the aliens began to understand just how completely they had misunderstood human nature. They watched June turn the wreckage of their ship into useful tools and building materials. They saw Hana's detailed studies of local ecosystem, which included information that their own scientists had never discovered. They experienced Kim Woo's casual ability to fix complex problems with whatever materials happened to be available. What surprised them most was not the humans' technical skills, but their approach to problems. When the water filtration system broke down, the aliens assumed this was a potentially fatal crisis. June simply built a new one, using different principles and better materials. When a pack of predators discovered their settlement, the aliens expected a desperate fight for survival. Instead, Hana studied the predators' behavior and figured out how to redirect them to better hunting grounds. You do not fight the environment, Morden observed after watching June work with a storm rather than against it, using the wind patterns to improve their power generation system. You make it part of your solution. Fighting the environment is stupid, June replied. The environment is bigger than you are and it doesn't get tired. Better to figure out what it wants and find a way to give that to it while getting what you need. The aliens were also confused by human social behavior. They had expected humans to be aggressive and territorial, based on their reputation as a violent species. Instead, they found themselves being cared for by people who had every reason to hate them. The humans shared their food, their shelter, and their knowledge without asking for anything in return. "Why do you help us?" Captain Raxtel asked one evening as they sat around the fire that June had built in the main living area. "We are the ones responsible for your exile. We voted to send your species to death worlds rather than allow you to join galactic civilization." June was working on a piece of equipment while they talked, using tools he had made from local materials. "Because you needed help," he said without looking up from his work. "And because leaving people to die when you can save them is wrong." "But we are not your people," Science Director Velnath pointed out. "We are aliens. We are different species with different biology and different cultures. By helping us, you gain nothing and risk your own safety." "So?" Hana asked from where she was updating her research notes. "You're still people. You're still alive. You still matter." This concept seemed to break something fundamental in the aliens' understanding of the universe. In their experience, species helped their own kind and viewed other species as competitors for resources. The idea of interspecies altruism, especially between species that were actively hostile to each other, was completely foreign to them. The aliens got a more dramatic demonstration of human nature when the biggest storm they had yet experienced hit the settlement. The weather monitoring system showed winds that were strong enough to lift buildings and lightning that could melt metal. The storm was so powerful that even the local predators fled to deep caves and underground shelters. "This storm will destroy everything," Morden said, watching the readings on the monitoring equipment. "We should evacuate to the deepest caves and hope to survive until it passes. Or," June said, checking the structural integrity of their main shelter, "we could have a dinner party." The aliens thought this was a joke until they realized that the humans were serious. While Category 5 winds howled outside and lightning struck the ground every few seconds, the humans calmly prepared a large meal and invited everyone to gather in the main living area. The shelter, which June had designed and built using local materials and techniques adapted from traditional Earth architecture, barely shook despite the incredible forces acting on it. "On our worlds," Captain Raxtel said, watching the storm through the reinforced windows, "such weather would be a civilization-ending catastrophe. Cities would be destroyed, millions would die, the survivors would spend years recovering from the damage." "That's because you build your cities to resist storms," Kim Woo said, passing around a bottle of alcohol that he had distilled from local fruits. "We build our shelters to work with storms. The design redirects the wind flow to actually strengthen the structure under load." As if to demonstrate his point, a particularly strong gust of wind hit the shelter, and instead of shaking, the building seemed to settle more firmly into its foundation. The storm became background noise for conversation, no more threatening than rain on a normal day. "You are not afraid," Science Director Velnath observed. "Afraid of what?" Hana asked. "Bad weather? We're inside, we're warm, we have good food and good company. The storm will pass in a few hours, and tomorrow we'll go outside and see if it brought us anything useful." "Anything useful?" Mordun repeated. "Storms usually uncover new mineral deposits or wash interesting specimens down from the mountains," June explained. "Sometimes they knock down trees that we can use for building materials. Last big storm brought us a new type of crystal that works really well for energy storage." The aliens sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm and trying to process what they were experiencing. These humans, the species they had branded as too dangerous for civilized society, were treating a planet-killing storm as an opportunity for a social gathering. The death world that was supposed to kill them in hours had become their home in months. "Our databases classify humans as an aggressive and territorial species," Captain Raxtel said eventually. "But you are not aggressive toward us, even though we condemned you to death." "We can be aggressive when we need to be," June said. The rescue ship arrived on a clear morning when the storms were quiet, and even the larger predators seemed to be taking a day off from hunting. Lee Jun was working in the garden when he heard the familiar whine of spacecraft engines approaching from the eastern mountains. This ship was much larger than Kim Woo's crashed shuttle, and it was flying in a controlled pattern that suggested the pilot knew exactly where they were going. "Looks like someone's coming to check on their diplomats," Hana said, looking up from the plant samples she was cataloging. Over the past 2 weeks, she had identified 17 new species that could be used for food or medicine, including 3 that seemed to have properties that could extend the lifespan of several galactic species. The ship that landed near their settlement was sleek and obviously expensive. It bore the markings of the Galactic Council, but also symbols that June didn't recognize. The airlock opened and 2 figures emerged. One was clearly another alien, tall and thin with blue-gray skin and too many joints in its arms. The other was human. "Finally," Kim Woo said, putting down the communication device he had been rebuilding. "Maybe now we can get some answers about what's really going on out there." The human who stepped off the ship was a woman who looked to be in her 30s, with short black hair and the kind of practical clothing that suggested she was used to working in difficult conditions. She looked around the settlement with obvious surprise, taking in the solid buildings, the thriving garden, and the general air of prosperity that had grown up around New Tuesday. "I'm Choi Dana," she said in Korean as she approached them. "I'm a linguist working with the progressive faction of the Galactic Council. This is Captain Yultek of the Council Rescue Service." She gestured to the alien beside her, who was looking at their settlement with what might have been amazement or confusion. "Rescue Service?" June asked. "Are we being rescued, or are they?" He pointed toward the sealed chamber where the 3 alien diplomats were resting. High Inquisitor Morden and his colleagues had recovered significantly over the past weeks, but they still needed the filtered atmosphere that the humans had created for them. "That's a very good question," Dana said, "and the answer is more complicated than you might expect." Captain Yultek made a series of clicking sounds that Dana translated. "He says that according to all their records, this planet should have killed you within hours of landing. The fact that you've not only survived but built a thriving settlement is causing significant debate within the Council." They gathered in the main living area of the shelter, where the rescued aliens were able to join the conversation through the communication system that connected their sealed chamber to the rest of the settlement. Morden, Raxtel, and Velnath had spent weeks observing human behavior, and their reports had already begun to filter back to the Council through the emergency beacon they had activated. "The progressive faction has been arguing for years that the exile policy was wrong," Dana explained. "We believe that humans were banished, not because we were dangerous, but because we represented something the Council couldn't understand or control." "Which is what exactly?" Kim Woo asked. "Adaptability," Science Director Velnath said from the chamber. Its crystalline structure seemed to pulse with different colors as it spoke. "Your species adapts to conditions that would kill others. You find solutions to problems that others consider impossible. You turn disadvantages into advantages." Captain Yultek made more clicking sounds, and Dana translated again. "He says that the Council civilizations all evolved on what humans would call garden worlds: stable climates, predictable seasons, abundant resources, few natural disasters. They developed technology and society under ideal conditions. And then humans showed up," Hana said. "And then humans showed up," Dana confirmed. "A species that had developed spaceflight while still fighting wars. A species that could thrive in environments that others found hostile. A species that seemed to treat impossible problems as interesting puzzles." High Inquisitor Morden spoke up from the chamber. "We were afraid," he admitted. "Not of human violence, though that was the excuse we used. We were afraid of human adaptability. We were afraid that if humans joined the Council, they would make the rest of us obsolete." This was clearly a difficult admission for Morden to make. He had spent his career advocating for the superiority of Council civilization over the chaos of human society. Now he was acknowledging that the chaos might actually be a strength rather than a weakness. "What changed your mind?" June asked. "Watching you," Captain Raxtel answered. "Watching you save us when you had every reason to let us die. Watching you build a home in a place we designed to be your tomb. Watching you treat a death world like just another place to live." Dana opened a portable display device and showed them images of other human settlements throughout the galaxy. Since the exile policy had begun, humans had been scattered to dozens of supposedly uninhabitable worlds. Instead of dying, they had thrived. Desert worlds had become agricultural centers. Ice worlds had become mining operations. Even the vacuum of space had become home to human communities that lived in asteroid habitats. Every death world where humans have been exiled has become a successful colony within a year, Dana said. You're turning the galaxy's worst real estate into prime territory. And that scares them? Hana asked. Terrifies them, Mordun confirmed. Because it means that humans can live anywhere. It means that there are no limits to where your species can go or what you can do. It means that the comfortable boundaries of council space are meaningless to you. Captain Yultek made a long series of sounds that included what might have been laughter. Dana's translation was more diplomatic. He says that the council spent centuries mapping the galaxy and classifying worlds as habitable or uninhabitable. Humans have made those classifications meaningless in less than a decade. Kim Woo leaned back in his chair, which was built from local materials but was surprisingly comfortable. So what happens now? Do they keep exiling us? Do they try to kill us? Do they pretend we don't exist? That's what we're here to find out, Dana said. The progressive faction wants to offer humans full membership in the council, with certain conditions. The conservative faction wants to continue the exile policy. The moderate faction is proposing something in between. And what do the humans want? June asked. That depends on which humans you ask, Dana replied. Some want revenge for the exile. Some want nothing to do with the council at all. Some want to negotiate. That's why I'm here, to find out what you want. June looked around at the settlement they had built. In 6 months, they had turned a death world into a comfortable home. They had domesticated local wildlife, established sustainable agriculture, created art from local materials, and even begun making improvements to the environment that would make it more habitable for other species. What are the conditions for council membership? Hana asked. The council wants humans to serve as crisis specialists, Dana explained. When disasters happen, when worlds become uninhabitable, when situations seem hopeless, they want humans to be the ones who respond. Emergency cleanup crew, Kim Woo said. They want us to be the janitors of the galaxy. More like doctors, Science Director Velnoth corrected. They want you to heal worlds that others cannot save. Captain Yultek made more sounds, and Dana's expression became serious as she translated. He says that there are currently 47 worlds in council space that are considered lost causes. Planets that have been rendered uninhabitable by war, disaster, or environmental collapse. The council has written them off as permanently dead. And they think we can fix them? June asked. Based on what you've accomplished here, yes, Mordun said. You have taken the worst world in our database and made it livable. If you can do that, you can probably restore worlds that others have given up on. Dana showed them images of some of these lost worlds. Planets covered in toxic clouds from industrial accidents. Worlds where the ecosystem had collapsed from overpopulation. Places where war had left the surface radioactive or poisoned. To council species, these were monuments to failure, permanent reminders of what could go wrong when civilization lost control. To human eyes, they looked like interesting challenges. So, they want to hire us, Hana said. They want to offer you full citizenship and equal representation in the council in exchange for taking on the jobs that no one else can do, Dana clarified. Jobs like living on death worlds, Kim Woo said. Jobs like turning death worlds into garden worlds, Captain Raxtel corrected. June walked to the window and looked out at the landscape that had been designed to kill him. The carnivorous trees were blooming with flowers that attracted the beneficial insects. The acid rain was feeding his power systems. The gravity that was supposed to crush him had made him stronger. The predators that were supposed to eat him had become his livestock. It's not a bad offer, he said finally. We get full membership, equal rights, and they pay us to do what we do anyway. Which is? Dana asked. Make impossible things possible, Hana said. Turn problems into opportunities. Make homes in places where others see only death. High Inquisitor. Mordun spoke from his chamber, and for the first time since they had rescued him, his voice carried something that might have been hope. 6 months after the rescue ship had arrived, Li Jun stood on the same observation platform where he had watched the morning storms for the past year. The view was quite different now. Where once there had been only wilderness and hostile terrain, there was now a small but thriving town. New Tuesday had grown from a desperate survival shelter into the first official human settlement in council space. The transformation had been remarkable even by human standards. The original settlement had expanded into a network of interconnected buildings that worked with the local environment rather than fighting against it. The carnivorous trees had been cultivated into living architecture that provided natural climate control. The predators had been domesticated into livestock and working animals. The acid rain had been harnessed to power a manufacturing center that produced equipment for the growing colony. "The transport from Earth arrives tomorrow," Parkhana said, joining him on the platform. She was carrying a datapad filled with information about the new colonists who would be joining them. Engineers, scientists, artists, farmers, teachers. People who wanted to build something new in a place where others saw only death. "How many this time?" June asked. 200 families, Hana replied. "Plus the advance team for the restoration project." The restoration project was the Council's first attempt to reclaim one of the lost worlds using human methods. They had chosen a planet called Vexhi, which had been rendered uninhabitable by an industrial accident 3 centuries ago. The atmosphere was toxic, the soil was poisoned, and the water was acidic enough to dissolve metal. To Council species, it was a permanent monument to environmental disaster. To humans, it looked like a fixer-upper. The advance team would spend 6 months on Vexhi, studying the environment and developing restoration strategies. If they succeeded, it would prove that human methods could work on a galactic scale. If they failed, the exile policy might return with a vengeance. "Any word from the other settlements?" June asked. Hana checked her datapad. "New Osaka is reporting their first successful harvest. The desert world they were sent to is now producing food for 3 star systems. New Lagos has established the first underwater cities in council space on that ocean world that was supposed to drown them. And New Seoul just sent a message saying they figured out how to live comfortably in zero gravity without artificial habitats. Each human settlement had found ways not just to survive, but to thrive in conditions that other species considered impossible. The exile worlds had become showcases of human adaptability and innovation. What was meant to be punishment had become advertising for human capabilities. "The council delegation should be here soon," Hana said, looking up at the sky where several ships were beginning to appear. The formal ceremony to establish New Tuesday as an official council colony was more than just bureaucratic paperwork. It was a symbolic recognition that humans had earned their place in galactic civilization. More importantly, it was the signing of the Death World Accord, the agreement that would make humans the galaxy's crisis response specialists. The first ship to land belonged to Ambassador Velthak, who had changed considerably since that day when he had pronounced the death sentence on June and Hana. The ambassador's robes were different now, decorated with symbols that represented cooperation rather than judgment. His attitude was different too, respectful rather than dismissive. "The transformation is remarkable," Velthak said as he toured the settlement. "Our models predicted that this world would remain uninhabitable for thousands of years. You have made it not just livable, but desirable." The second ship brought High Inquisitor Morden, who was no longer an Inquisitor. His experience on Kethmora had led him to resign from his position and join the progressive faction. He now served as a liaison between human settlements and council bureaucracy, helping to translate human methods into forms that other species could understand and implement. "The children are the most remarkable part," Morden said, watching. A group of human children playing with domesticated creatures that still looked terrifying to alien eyes. "They have no fear of this environment. To them, this is simply home." The third ship was the largest, carrying delegations from 17 different council species. Each species had sent representatives to witness the ceremony and learn about human restoration techniques. Some were skeptical, some were curious, and some were desperate enough to try anything to reclaim their own lost worlds. But the fourth ship was the most important one. It carried Kim Woo, who had spent the past months visiting other human settlements and documenting their successes. He also brought news from Earth about how humanity was responding to their new role in galactic society. "The government is calling it the greatest opportunity in human history," Kim Woo reported as they gathered in the main meeting hall. "We're not just joining galactic civilization. We're reshaping it. And how do people feel about that? June asked. Excited, Kim Woo said. Terrified, proud, confused. Pretty much every emotion you can think of, all at the same time. The ceremony itself was held in the main plaza of New Tuesday, surrounded by buildings that demonstrated human ingenuity and cooperation with alien environments. Representatives from 47 council species attended, either in person or through virtual presence systems. The entire event was broadcast throughout council space, watched by billions of beings who were seeing humans in a completely new light. The Death World Accord recognizes that survival is not just about avoiding death, Ambassador Velthak announced to the assembled crowd. It is about finding life in places where others see only emptiness. It is about creating hope where others see only despair. The formal signing took place at sunset, when the storm clouds created a natural light show across the sky. Lightning flashed in colors that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, and the wind carried the sense of growing things and new possibilities. It was a fitting backdrop for an agreement that would change the relationship between species and their environments throughout the galaxy. Under the terms of the Accord, humans received full membership in the Galactic Council with equal representation and voting rights. They also received exclusive contracts for environmental restoration and crisis response throughout council space. In exchange, they agreed to share their methods and technologies with other species and to train council personnel in adaptive survival techniques. What this means, Choi Dana explained to the gathered representatives, is that the 47 lost worlds will no longer be lost. The disasters that seem permanent will become temporary setbacks. The problems that appear impossible will become interesting challenges. As the ceremony concluded and the various delegations prepared to return to their ships, June found himself standing once again on his observation platform. The view was still spectacular, but now it included landing pads and communication arrays, and the lights of a growing community. The Death World had become a garden world, and the exiles had become citizens. Any regrets? Hana asked, joining him for what had become their traditional evening conversation. June thought about that question as he watched the ships preparing to depart. Some would carry news of the ceremony back to the council. Others would transport human teams to begin restoration work on dead worlds. Still others would bring more colonists to New Tuesday and the other human settlements. None, he said finally. This turned out better than anything I could have imagined. Even being exiled to a death world? Especially being exiled to a death world, June replied. If they had just let us join the council normally, we would have been junior members for centuries. Now, we're equal partners with something unique to contribute. In the distance, something that might have been a song echoed across the landscape. It was one of the nocturnal creatures that had learned to live alongside the human settlement, adding its voice to the symphony of sounds that made up a Kethmora evening. The creature had once been classified as a deadly predator. Now it was part of the community. What's next? Hana asked. June pulled up a holographic display that showed the current status of restoration projects throughout council space. Vexhai was scheduled to begin active restoration in 3 months. A water world devastated by industrial pollution would start recovery efforts in 6 months. A dozen other worlds were being evaluated for restoration potential. Tomorrow we start training the next generation of restoration specialists, he said. Council species who want to learn human methods. Next week we begin the deep ocean restoration project here on Kethmora. Next month we start preliminary surveys on 3 more. Lost worlds. Sounds busy, Hana observed. Sounds like a Tuesday, June corrected. As the last of the council ships disappeared into the star-filled sky, New Tuesday settled into its evening routine. The storm warning systems showed clear weather for the next few days, which meant good conditions for outdoor work. The agricultural monitors reported another successful harvest from the expanded growing areas. The wildlife management systems indicated that all the domesticated predators were healthy and well-fed. In the residential areas, families were putting children to bed with stories about the early days of the settlement, when every day was a struggle for survival. In the workshops, engineers were designing equipment for the restoration of dead worlds.